Things are about to shift. Monster Hunter never leaves us waiting for terribly long. More than one title being worked on at once, as well as elongated lifetimes for these games thanks to the title update systems, have made it so that Monster Hunter only ever really rests for these brief intervals, whilst still being able to feel fresh and the game still being of a top tier quality. And we currently find ourselves in one of these lulls. This period between life cycles where we can only enjoy what games we have and wait. But it's not just any lull. This is a lull presumably between Monster Hunter generations, the 5th into the 6th, we believe. Though the relevance of the Monster Hunter game numbered generations might not quite be as meaningful as they used to be, a little bit more nebulous than they used to be. All of that aside, however, we are anticipating a massive new title, a new game made by much of the team responsible for Monster Hunter World. This should be in the works, and well into production at this point. And not only is this the case, but the franchise's 20th anniversary is creeping up on us fast, hitting next year, March to be precise. Those of us in the know can sort of feel it, that something big is on the horizon, that something important and profound is just out of reach. The alignment of dates, the small, tiny slivers of quotes and information we have here and there, information from the past that we can draw on. There's a lot of worthwhile connections to be drawn. A lot of educated guesses that can be made. So, let's do a little looking and make a few guesses, and I'll explain why I'm currently brimming with excitement for the next Monster Hunter game, with, admittedly, a healthy dose of concern. If you're just as heavily anticipating the next Monster Hunter game as I am, feel free to subscribe, cause I think I'm going to be talking about it in the not too distant future. Before we kick this off though, I do not want to sell the idea that anything I'm about to talk about is set in stone and definite. All we really have is some speculation and some educated guesses and some wants and hopes and desires. I don't want to promise you, or even myself for that matter, something that I don't know for certain. And we should all go into this video and the future with the understanding that everything I say here might turn out wrong, and that's perfectly fine. So let's look at the idea of a 6th generation Monster Hunter game dropping on the anniversary month of the franchise. It sounds like some star alignment magic. It would be pretty perfect, honestly. But where does the idea come from? How feasible is it? And how can we back this idea up? First off, we have a couple little tidbits of quotes that we can cling to right now that certainly seem to heavily suggest this idea that we might be getting a March release of the next game. The first key piece of evidence that we have is a very brief quote from executive producer Ryozo Tsujimoto. Most of you have very likely seen this by now. When several Japanese developers were asked about 2023 ambitions, Ryozo simply stated, "Pay attention to Tokyo Game Show in 2023. Now, Ryozo Tsujimoto is kinda Mr. Monster Hunter at the moment, so he's someone important to listen to. As a result, this quote served as a pretty strong pointer that we were gonna get something big revealed at TGS this year. However, a decent devil's advocate point was brought up by Gaijin Hunter on the Third Fleet podcast he hosts with Roricon. Good podcast, by the way. You should check it out if you haven't seen it, or don't watch those two's content. They make good stuff. Gaijin made the point that TGS really isn't this major reveal showcase type of event. It's more of a trade show. And that's not a bad point to make. I can't say I really remember TGS being a huge event for major reveals either. You might see some trailers for already announced projects, but that's the bulk of what I remember. Perhaps some of you with better knowledge of the event would know a little bit better than me, feel free to let me know, but in my recent recollection, TGS was never really the big hype reveal event like E3 was, or the Game Awards kinda is right now. So, with this point made, it does humble the excitement for Tokyo Game Show just a little. We might very well get a spin-off game, maybe a remastered port announced there, and those options are still very much on the table, and those options would be great. However, we do have some more recent statements made about Monster Hunter from a shareholder call. I bet many of you have seen these statements as well, but to summarize, Capcom seems very keen to develop the influence of Monster Hunter worldwide. World, as well as Rise, did wonders for the recognition of Monster Hunter, but I wouldn't say it's quite that household name yet. It's kinda still in this middling period. People know what it is, but it's not brought up as one of the big game franchises. Capcom has made it clear that they are making strides to change that. It was blatantly stated that the upcoming Monster Hunter Now is being designed not simply as a revenue maker, but more of a title to, quote, enhance awareness of the Monster Hunter brand on a global basis. And side note, hopefully that means Monster Hunter Now isn't atrociously monetized, because I'd like to give it a shot and I'd like to like it, but I have not heard a lot of good opinions about Niantic recently, so we're gonna have to see about that one. It was said in the same call that plans are being made to further expand Monster Hunter in the near future, and they actually doubled down on Tokyo Game Show, saying that they are looking forward to the scheduled appearance at the event, now that events like this are more or less back in full swing. Additionally, we have a quote recently stating that Capcom is expecting to sell millions with titles to be sold by the end of this fiscal year, which just so happens to be the end of March. The 20th anniversary was even directly highlighted in this conversation. So, the way I'm looking at this, it makes sense to me that Capcom had a massive hit with Monster Hunter World, and another bona fide hit with Monster Hunter Rise. They successfully put Monster Hunter on the map, and now they want to maintain a strong foothold, so they can solidify it as a name. Monster Hunter Now will keep the name alive for a little bit, hopefully with some positive connotation. I'm still not super sure about Niantic, and with the great reception of World and Rise, Capcom will be primed to drop a huge new title on fully modern hardware, with those two backing names insinuating the quality of the new game. This is kind of looking to be the strategy. Now, let me get into the past of Monster Hunter releases to further solidify that a drop in March is probably what they're going to go for. Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak's last major update was in June, and its final tail end content released in July. If Monster Hunter 6 does get announced in September, that's a 2-month gap between the end of Sunbreak and the game being announced. And if MH6 releases in March, that's 6 months of marketing. Now, let's do a little bit of comparison work here. Monster Hunter World, announced in June of 2017, released in mid-January 2018. 7 months of marketing. Monster Hunter Rise gets announced in September of 2020, releases March 2021. 6 months. Monster Hunter Generations, announced May 2015, releases November same year. 6 months. So, this 6 to 7 month range is a really good look at how long Capcom is going to spend marketing a Monster Hunter game. In fact, we have a September to March window already in this example. So, if Monster Hunter 6 is going to release on its 20th anniversary month in March, September is the best approximate month to announce it and run the advertisement campaign, and Tokyo Game Show is likely the best place to announce it in September. And to throw a little bit more fuel on this fire, as I said at the top, Monster Hunter games very often are announced in close proximity to a previous game reaching the end of its life cycle. The fact that they have 2 of these games in active development at the same time lets them put a ton of work into each Monster Hunter, whilst at the same time, we are not left waiting for all that long. In fact, there's been some overlap in recent years due to the whole title update thing. World's final major title update dropped in February 2019, while Iceborne was announced 2 months earlier in December of 2018. Then, the end of Iceborne, the Vitalis update, dropped in October 2020, a month after Rise was announced in September of that year. Looking back to a time before the title updates, Generations Ultimate released in Japan in August 2017, meaning there was only 10 months between this game dropping with only event quest post-launch and world being announced. We are very rarely left waiting for another title or expansion to be announced. And in this era of the title updates for the games, the gaps are incredibly short. The potential 2-month gap between Sunbreak's ending and MH6's possible announcement honestly makes a ton of sense. So, if we want to look at this as a pattern, Monster Hunter 6 being announced 2 months after Sunbreak ends, only to be marketed for 6 months, is very much in line with the marketing periods and release window gaps that this series has had. So with all that, I am rather confident that we will see Monster Hunter 6 announced at Tokyo Game Show and released in March of 2024. And considering there's no need for a delay, this is some star-aligning destiny of a release. Perfect lineup, just faded, poetic, just for the pure sentimental value of the occasion. There would be a weight and a gravity to a release like this, and we haven't even talked about the potential of the game itself. So let's do that, shall we? First of all, I want to talk about Monster Hunter World and what its success means for the next game. Although the concept of the main team and portable team is likely a bit outdated at this point for Monster Hunter development, I'd be willing to bet there's quite a bit of overlap between the people working on World and 6. It is important to remember that Monster Hunter World remains Capcom's highest selling title in the company's history. Thus, Monster Hunter World specifically carries a fair bit of its own weight, simply of its own merits, in a way that is slightly separate from Monster Hunter as a whole, if that makes sense. As a result, I believe that 6 will have some fairly heavy influence by and reminiscent of World. To what degree exactly, I can't say, but there's a few possibilities. Now, is this going to be Monster Hunter World 2? It's not impossible, but neither is it enormously probable. It might not be titled World 2, but I don't think I would be shocked if the game took place on the New World continent, perhaps with some familiar NPCs, a spiritual successor, a direct sequel if not necessarily in name. Perhaps, perhaps not. However, to counter that point, Monster Hunter is a very forward-moving franchise that is non-committal with its lore and world building, much to the chagrin of a few. Point being, there's a fair chance that Monster Hunter 6 may go to another new region in another non-specified portion of the world with only a handful of context clues and references out there with which the lore heads can make some educated guesses as to where and when the game takes place. A choice the team would make so that they are untethered to specifics and constraints generated by known locations and regions and characters. Not everyone loves that the Monster Hunter developers do this, but I completely understand why they take this approach. So, despite the renown that World has, the team may decide to just move on. I am legitimately interested to see what happens here, and I actually kinda don't know which one I would prefer. On one hand, I love that Monster Hunter always seems to want to keep trying new things and create new locations and characters, but on the other hand, I kind of want to see the settlements that we know about and the characters that we know about progress. I kind of want to see if there are new settlements in the New World, if there are weird and wacky environments on that continent that we didn't go to. I want to see how the commission turned out. And like I said, the New World is kind of just this endlessly spanning, wild, untamed continent that they can kind of just do whatever with. Let me know in the comments what you would prefer. The popularity of World could also mean a bit of a return to some of its game mechanic choices that Rise didn't implement. Could we see a return to slingers, picking up monster tracks, wedge beetles, investigation levels, passive monsters, more idle monster animations, and environment interactions? I really hope so. A lot of this stuff solidified World as a big favorite for me. The Slinger, I thought, was a really good multi-purpose tool and wasn't all that intrusive until the Clutch Claw was implemented. And more than anything, I desperately want to return to form for the attention to detail for the ecology environment, and monster personality outside of combat. I want Monster Hunter 6 to double down on this aspect of world. The gutting of this component is a major factor in why I prefer World over Rise. It was this aspect that I think massively contributed to why World became the powerhouse that it was, and I want that to be the prevailing legacy of World going forward. I believe that 6 is poised to take these elements and even the endemic life system from Rise, which was really good, and further flesh that stuff out. If it does this, we could have an enormously immersive experience that pulls you in and just stays with you. What I hope, more than anything, and what I think we might be able to anticipate, is that whether or not 6 is a direct sequel to World, I do think it will, and has the potential to, make its predecessor look like a tech demo. In terms of how much depth it can put into its world building via the small details in its creatures and environments. And you gotta remember, World already exists, so they have this template already. They don't need to build these mechanics again. They don't need to start from scratch again and learn how to do this again. This is something that makes me really excited. I think World was excellent and a massive shot of predominantly positive adrenaline for the franchise. As remarkable of a game as I think it is, the potential of a game learning directly from its example, directly building upon some of its philosophies, having some of its core team members, will make World invaluable as a stepping stone for the games that come after. And I really want to see what a team that already has this experience and this framework is capable of with a brand new game. Kinda, sorta still on the World topic, let's talk about graphics real quick. Now, I think it's fairly commonly agreed upon that art direction is more important than pure graphical fidelity. Plenty of games from the 90s and early 2000s still look excellent today because their art style remains timeless. So, I agree that it does not truly matter if Monster Hunter 6 is the single most beautiful high-end game ever made. However, I will admit it, I do want to see Monster Hunter look ridiculously high-end. I do want to see how far technology can push the models and the maps and effects and textures and all that goodness. I really want to see just how good Monster Hunter can look. And yeah, whatever the game after that is probably going to look even better and on and on and on. But I'll admit it, caveman brain wants to see nice graphics. I'll be playing on PS5, and I'm sure that you guys on those super nice PCs will have an even better experience than I do. But PS5 has proven to have some pretty gorgeous looking games. FF16 and Demon Souls Remastered are both pretty beautiful. And now that we're moving on to a time where games aren't being made with the PS4 and Xbox One in mind, those restraints created by that older hardware no longer really have any bearing on the games being made now. In terms of the actual art design, as much as the 5th generation does have some pretty great graphical quality, I'm personally hoping for a little bit more brightness, a little bit more vibrant color palette this time around. A bit more color, specifically in the monster models and in some of the environments. Just to give an example, I think my favorite Rathalos design is still the 3rd and 4th generation incarnation, with the more colorful wings and the very deep red and black colors on his scales. I'm hoping for just a slightly more vibrant and fantastical look to the game. It doesn't have to look too grounded. Also, in World, there's like a weird, like, foggy effect in some places, and I kind of hope that goes away because it kind of mutes things a little bit. And one more thing. I'm very excited to see what an Unbound RE engine can do for Monster Hunter. Rise can be a really good looking game in places. In others, not so much. But at its peak, Monster Hunter Rise can be a very pretty game. On top of this, it still shocks me that the Nintendo Switch can handle things like All-Mother Narwa and the Rampage. There's a little bit of black magic built into the RE engine that game can work that good on the Nintendo Switch. Rise is probably one of the better performing games of its scale on that console, and I think it's a testament to just how good that engine is. Ari is definitely high up there in terms of an industry standard. And other games Capcom has been making on it, like Street Fighter 6, Resident Evil 8, and Exoprimal, look and run really good. Graphics are a surface level thing to be excited for, but I truly think a gorgeous Monster Hunter 6 can serve to solidify itself as a landmark title for the franchise. Think about it. World looked and ran pretty great, but it was running on this ancient engine from 2006 built for the PS3. Rise looked and ran pretty great, but it was built to be played on lowest common denominator of the console. Take those restraints off, and I'm excited to see what we get. Alright, so let's talk about another big topic in the community right now. Underwater combat. This conversation gets brought up every now and again, but there seems to be a particular surge in discourse around the potential return of underwater combat to Monster Hunter right now. This is a component that I want back, and a solid portion of that is baked in nostalgia, admittedly. Monster Hunter Tri was my introduction to the series, and I have a lot of fondness for the maps and the monsters and the memories that resulted from the underwater combat. I'd be curious to see if that combat even still really holds up all that much. I know it wasn't universally loved, but I also remember playing on a Wiimote and a nunchuck and enjoying myself, so I don't think it could have been that bad. So, beyond a simple desire on my end, is there an actual chance that Underwater comes back? And is there a chance that it will be good? Well, for both, there absolutely is a chance, but let's look at what I think could potentially be indicators that the MH team wants to head back this way. Now, when you're trying to read tea leaves like this, they can read out whatever you want them to if you look at it a certain way. So, all of what I might say here could be a bit of a stretch, honestly. First of all, let's look at Rise. If you want to play a Monster Hunter game with sustained three-dimensional movement, quick evasion in a 3D space, and attack animations designed for people who aren't on solid ground, you can play that Monster Hunter game right now. The wire bugs in Rise are a further evolution of the continuous expansion of vertical and three-dimensional movement that Monster Hunter has been building and building upon ever since Tri. I think Tri was a bit of a try to run before you can walk type of scenario, where they jumped right into a full 3D space, and it wasn't awful, but it wasn't great either. Then, in 4 Ultimate, they introduced ledge hopping for mounting attacks and the insect glaive. Then Generations created aerial-style combat. World brought the clutch claw, wedge beetles, and slide attacks, followed by wire bugs and Rise. The team is getting more experienced and gradually building back up into this 3D space. Now, does that mean that they are absolutely willing to take the plunge again in the next game? Not necessarily. But I have absolutely noticed that it looks like they are trying to build themselves back up to this point and have much more know-how as to how to compensate for hunters with 3D movement now than they did back in 2009. How to create attacks for it, how to create evasive tools for it, how to balance hitboxes around it and hurt boxes around it. And remember that we have a decent number of these shallow water fights for monsters like Gyrototis, meant to emulate that feel of fighting an aquatic opponent. So they're experimenting with this concept again. Let's talk about the monsters, too. The Leviathan category came back in full force in Rise, expanding upon the skeleton of the Lords of the Sea, and showing that the team is actively working with these skeletons. We have several new monsters, as well as a whole new category that have shown themselves capable of being underwater, introduced in the time period since underwater combat went away. The entire amphibian classification was introduced in the 4th generation, and the simple name of the category, amphibian, implies a capacity to breathe underwater. Yet all of them have been made post-underwater combat. There is the potential integration of frontier monsters into mainline Monster Hunter. Several of these monsters have an aquatic nature, despite never being in a game that had underwater combat. And of course, there's Lagiacrus. We know the teams have been trying to get him to work. We've seen the proof of concept footage from Worlds. Lagiacrus will be to Monster Hunter 6 what Zenogre and Gormagala were to the 5th generation games. The most highly demanded, sought after, and requested monster for this roster. And the team knows that. To put the king back in the ocean where he belongs would be this monumental moment for Monster Hunter in of itself. And As I've been pointing out, he is far from the only monster in the roster that can be plopped into the water. There's a deceptively decent amount of pre-existing beasts that have and have not had underwater fights that would be suitable for addition to a game roster with aquatic combat. And that's just returning monsters. If this mechanic were to be brought back, the team would likely go heavy with brand new aquatic creations. And there are several categories of monster that could absolutely be brought to this level. New leviathans, piscine wyverns, elder dragons, and amphibians, for sure, yes. But what about new aquatic snake wyverns? What about new semi-aquatic fanged beasts? What about seabed-dwelling carapaceons? There's a lot you can do besides big fish and sea dragons. This layer of combat, I think, wouldn't just be a lovely nostalgia kick for me, but creatively stimulating. There's a lot of avenues that this choice could possibly open up. A lot of bold new creations and long-missed old friends, and I think the stage is being set. Perhaps this is a bit of wishful thinking. Perhaps this is a reach. Perhaps this is a bit of nostalgia delusion, but I think there's some reason to believe that the teams would want to give this another try. And for heaven's sake, give us an ice map with aquatic combat. Monster Hunter has a frozen seaway and a polar sea, and neither of them have underwater combat. Crossplay. Okay. If there's anything about a Monster Hunter 6 that I think is a safe bet, it's crossplay. Rise looked like it was going to get it, but something internally got in the way, whether the pandemic affected development too harshly, whether they couldn't get the right people off of another project, whether there was an issue with Rise's network or the game was just too far in development. I don't know. Stuff like crossplay is tough to implement. It's not just a switch you can flick on and off. Point being, based on that survey they put out in early Rise's lifetime, and the statement they made immediately after that survey concluded, apologizing that they couldn't implement crossplay, tells me that they definitely want to put it in. And crossplay is simply becoming an industry standard in general at this point. It's becoming more and more of an expectation for multiplayer rather than this cool new thing. Plus, it's not like Capcom isn't getting with the times with this. Both Street Fighter 6 and Exoprimal have crossplay. Unfortunately, at this moment, Exoprimal doesn't yet have the ability to create crossplay parties. I would wager that this is just an extra layer of difficulty to develop. But if Exoprimal is a bit of a crossplay sacrificial lamb, the party feature not being implemented until post-launch so that the teams better know how to put that feature into Monster Hunter 6, so be it. Unless something unforeseen happens, I think crossplay is a shoo-in for 6. In addition to this, I am desperately hoping for the return of 16-player hubs. I have a lot of friends that play Monster Hunter, and more that I will be trying to get into the franchise when the next title rolls around. Some of us are on PlayStation, and a lot of others are on PC. Plus, I just so happen to now have a community of Monster Hunter fans whom I would absolutely want to hunt with. Gotta get a Discord server up for that. If we get 16-player hubs and crossplay, that is almost more hype for me than anything, to be perfectly honest. If I can play with my friends on PC and PS5, get some big groups going, and get some community hunt nights, oh, that'd be a dream. That'd be awesome. And kind of a side desire, if we get 16-player hubs back, I hope dearly that we get a city hub like Loch Lac or Dundorma again. Something fully fleshed out and in-depth and with seamless no loading screens and full facilities like Elgato, but with that size and scope that Loch Lac had. That sounds like bliss to me. Now onto the subject of power creep and game speed. I think we are absolutely due for a slowdown, and I think we are probably going to get a bit of a slower, heftier, more grounded game than Rise and Sunbreak. The developers have made it clear by this point that they listen to feedback. I will bet you that they are aware that many players believe Monster Hunter Rise deviated a bit too hard into action game territory, dropped some of the hunting prep and environmental depth of the previous games, and jacked up that skill bloat to a degree higher than some players enjoy. Is all of this going to be rectified? Probably not. I think an element of power creep, big numbers, and big skill loadouts is just gonna be part of Monster Hunter's design, as it does appeal to some players who really want a power game. and really want something high speed and full of action and fun like that. But I think base game Monster Hunter 6 is going to look nothing like the end of Sunbreak. I think that it's also worth mentioning that the big numbered generation starting titles are often a waning of craziness from the previous titles. A common pattern in the generations is to build and build and build and be brought back down as the next era comes in. Freedom Unite had every mainline monster up until that point, as well as all 11 weapon categories, more than one map for a lot of the environment archetypes. Then Tri comes in, brought the roster down to 18 total bosses, removed many of the weapons from the game, experimented with underwater combat, rather than having a massive amount of pure content. Monster Hunter 4 wasn't too big of a gameplay reduction from Tri-Ultimate, but it also had considerably less content as it was starting the 4th generation and experimenting with the more vertical environments. Then Monster Hunter World was a huge slowdown in terms of game pace, hunter attack craziness, massive endgame, fantastical elements, and designs in comparison to Generations Ultimate. And I think 6 will once again trade many of Sunbreak's over-the-top elements for a more grounded approach, and hopefully also does away with the very counter-heavy gameplay style. Less over-the-top combat, more resources focused on new mechanics and game depth as opposed to craziness of combat. This is a pattern that can be seen a number of times in Monster Hunter, and this wisdom to pull back every couple of games and let things reset has been really healthy and refreshing and has prevented Monster Hunter from ever getting too hectic. And I foresee this trend repeating again with Monster Hunter 6, investing in something new, something that will overhaul the franchise again, rather than investing in power creep. Couple more things I'd like to see in Monster Hunter 6. Kind of a shopping list of things I'm hoping for. I think we are well past due for a 15th weapon category. I would love to see new entries for some of the less populated monsters like Neopterans, Carapacians, Piscine Wyverns, and Snake Wyverns. I am curious if the map design will start to do away with the segmented zones on seamless map structure. The loading zone devoid maps I think are absolutely here to stay, and all the better for it. They're amazing. However, one weakness of them is that the narrow pathways in between their zones have effectively made the big monsters like Gammoth and Duramboros impossible to implement. I would love to see the maps have a bit more fully open in some parts, and then have the narrower segments for forests and caves and tunnels and paths in other parts of the map. Having this more open feel to some of them. Not necessarily an open world game, that's not what I'm saying, but having the maps be a little bit more vast and expansive, or have the maps be a little bit more open and have just a little bit more space for the monsters in them. The return of big monsters could be an effect of this, and it could even really further enforce the realism of some of these environments, eliminating some of the gaminess of the segmented battle zones in World and Rise's maps. I would love to see more done with tracking and resource gathering. I want the track gathering from World and endemic life system from Rise to return. I love having more preparation work done in the actual field, more gathering on map, more strategy out in combat. I think these two ideas move a lot of the hunt prep from the pre-quest item box to the actual hunt in the environment, and I'd like for MH6 to double down on this. I'd love to see a bit of skill and damage rebalance that improves the viability of elements and defensive skills, and doesn't result in crit raw dominating so many options by margins that aren't even close again. I'd love to see a flagship and final boss that aren't Elder Dragons this time around, and this is coming from an Elder Dragon fan. I'd love if full item restock wasn't a thing anymore. I'm not sure if they're ever taken that out, but I'd like for it to go away, please. And I would absolutely love to see the doubling down of Frontier, and perhaps even Explore monsters finding their way into the main series games. Those are just a few things on my personal wish list for the next game, and of course, I'm ready to be surprised by the things I don't expect. Real quick, let's talk about the people making Monster Hunter 6, the Monster Hunter teams and Capcom. The actual development team, I have a ton of faith in. I have not agreed with every single choice, but I also haven't not deeply enjoyed every single Monster Hunter game I've played. Flaws and all. I have problems with Rise, I have problems with World, and with Generations, and with 4 Ultimate, and with Try, and with Freedom Unite. But those games are all top tier to god tier. Will Monster Hunter 6 be the perfect game? No. I know I'm probably going to have some issues with it. Probably some things that they took away that I wish they didn't, some things that they added that I wish that they didn't. And when those issues do manifest, I'll be honest with myself and the audience about it. But the Monster Hunter development team is an enormously competent group that constantly tries to move forward, innovate, improve, and absolutely take our feedback. Zinogre and Fatalis are in Iceborne because of fan demand. Several of the changes Sunbreak brought to Rise were exact echoes of the issues many of the fans had with Rise. This is a capable team, as far as I'm aware, really respects its audience. As for Capcom has its days where I love what they do, and its days where I really don't. It's pretty undeniable that Capcom's been pumping out some banger games recently. For most of its franchises, they've been letting their developers create some excellent products. Resident Evil's in a great place, Devil May Cry 5 was beloved, Monster Hunter is in the best place it's ever been, Street Fighter 6 is killing it right now, Exoprimal wasn't a massive success, but it's a pretty damn fun game. Dragon's Dogma is getting a damn good looking sequel that's super hyped up, Ace Attorney is getting some ports, Mega Man's getting some ports. Capcom is making some really good stuff right now. They are, however, occasionally making some game monetization choices that I don't agree with. Both Street Fighter 6 and Exoprimal have some premium battle pass-like systems implemented, and very recently, SF6 got in a bit of hot water for its very expensive Ninja Turtle skins for your lobby character. Though you could potentially make the argument that they're so expensive due to licensing costs, but that doesn't necessarily justify such steep expenses. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a bit of controversy over Resident Evil 4 Remake having some classic music backed behind a paywall. And in terms of Monster Hunter, there was a considerable amount of controversy over DLC weapon packs in a game with very lackluster event quest rewards. Now, it does warrant noting that the DLC weapon packs garnered so much of a controversy that the comment sections for their trailers were turned off, and Title Update 5 was both devoid of packs like that and had some slightly better event quest rewards than we had seen for the bulk of that game. Tad too little too late, but there was an improvement. Now, Capcom has yet to ruin a game with any overt pay-to-win garbage, and for the most part has allowed their games to thrive. And the argument can be made that, well, Capcom isn't as bad as Activision, or EA, or Ubisoft, or something like that. As well as it could be said that some forms of game monetization are clearly more or less egregious than others, and Capcom is usually sticking with ones that are slightly less egregious. And I do agree with both of those statements. However, I think that it is simply better to set good precedent rather than bad precedent, and to be careful with what game monetization you do engage with, lest you enable worse monetization down the road. I'm not going to tell anyone how to or how not to spend their money, but the potential for Monster Hunter to be clogged with battle passes and monster part bundles if things get out of control does exist. That possibility can happen, and I myself do not intend to encourage it to get to that point. I do want to preserve the game's integrity. I hope that the blowback from some of these controversies, as well as their recent successes, helps to prevent choices that could potentially hurt the game. And I would say more than anything, more than a lack of crossplay or lack of new content or frontier monsters or obnoxious power creep, that this is my number one concern about Monster Hunter 6. I'm sure there will still be a store full of stickers and emotes and other minor things to purchase, and a simple tip jar shop full of inconsequential little items doesn't really bother me. That's what World had. It was fine. It didn't hurt anything. And I hope that that's where we stay. So those are my wants, guesses, hopes, excitements, concerns, and speculations about Monster Hunter 6. Although I am a little wary of game monetization, I am very hyped for the graphical gameplay and fleshing out of previous ideas' potential of the game. I absolutely believe that we will see this title announced at Tokyo Game Show next month, and that it will be released in March of 2024. I think the 20th anniversary of this franchise will be highlighted with a phenomenal game that will learn and evolve from the growing pains pains and successes of the 5th generation, and I am beyond excited to be on YouTube with you guys, building a community, being at the forefront of the excitement and build up to its announcement and release. I think we're gonna have a really hype next couple of months and years. But as for now, this has been CR-Volcanic or Connor. Drop a like if you enjoyed, and if you want to see more and hear my coverage of Monster Hunter 6 when it is fully announced and being marketed, feel free to subscribe and hit the bell. I'm shooting for 5,000 subs by the end of my first year on this platform. I think we got it. Talk to you guys very soon. Shout out to all the patrons, and special shout out to Nihilist Chimerax and Silky Dino. Thanks, guys.